Mustafa Chowdury.
Mustafa Chowdury, work for the government, and then I live in Ottawa.
Let me begin by thanking Abiba Zaman and her team for having me over. It's always a pleasure to be here. Again, my story is sort of biographical. I was born and raised in Bangladesh, came to Canada in 1972. At that time, I was 23 years old. Then I went to Western, and then after a degree in library and information science, I went to Ottawa and worked for the government. And from then on, I worked for 34 years for the government. Over the years, I took different jobs and sort of moved through the ranks and assumed responsibility for visible minorities. And Bangladeshis fall into that category. You know about that. So as a coordinator of visible minority, I worked for a couple of years. My job was to recruit and refer visible minorities to the federal government. And it is at that time I learned about racism and discrimination and all the barriers that the visible minorities have to overcome. And they did. It's interesting, it was referred to by Tanya Das today also, talking about credentials, talked about non-recognition of experiences. For example, if you have IT experience, it doesn't matter where you learned it from, you have the trait, portable skills, but that wasn't recognized in Canada. That was one of the biggest problems, and my struggle was to go and talk to the managers and convince that so-and-so would be a good candidate, and my job was only to refer to them, whereas I wasn't involved in hiring. So you would see that the visible minorities were falling into the cracks. You refer 100 people and they don't get the job, somebody else gets the job. So we had to revisit the entire process, and then it was decided that visible minority people, so those who are working in the government, they would be present, and the interview has to be very structured. So that was designed, and then that resulted in some fruition. People were able to get jobs. There are a lot of kids who are born in Canada, came to see me. They passed the Foreign Service test, Foreign Affairs, through the Foreign Affairs, but they can't get through the oral process. You know, they're qualified people to pass. There's a lot of discrimination, and it's very hard to point out. The bottom line is that other people get jobs they don't get. My second job was a promotion from there. Then I was traveling across the country. At that time, I did come to British Columbia several times. My job was to look at the employers and whether or not they are hiring a representative workforce. In other words, visible minorities, persons with disabilities, Aboriginal people and women. Same thing again, it's across the country, and I traveled all over Canada. My job was to sit down with the CEO or the vice president and look at their workforce and do an analysis, do a planning so that they will have representative workforce over the years. Again, there are a lot of, the term that they use, often they said they're not qualified, but we came up with the concept that they could be qualifiable. There are qualifiable people, they could be qualified, we just have to identify high flyers and then sort of groom them and find jobs for them, which is what happens with the mainstream. Part of our job was to compare them with the mainstream, look at occupation groups. Census Canada helped us because it has all the information about graduates. So I remember going to McMaster University, close to, in Hamilton, and fighting, actually, literally with one employer. They're saying that we need bright people. So I was saying that, you saying that the bright people are confined to only one segment of the population, meaning the mainstream, because there's so segments of population. They wouldn't take from visible minority. So when I challenged them, and before that I did some homework, I just wanted to find out how many people graduated that year, engineers, from McMaster University, let alone other universities. So I had that statistics, this is the next number of people that you're hiring students, graduating students, and I don't see any visible minorities showing up. You know, this is the kind of way we were challenged. Things have changed greatly, and I'm happy to tell you that a lot of our children and grandchildren, they're doing very well in the government. Many of them have moved into a management category right now. It's showing, but it has taken a long time. It's taken a long time for them to come. I have, when I looked at the schedules other people's have written, so I wasn't sure where to put myself. So I thought I'd talk about myself a little bit. And then I'm living in Ottawa for the last 45 years or so. So I thought I would talk about how the Bangladesh is doing in Ottawa. So that would be the second part of it. The first part is very important because there's a lot of lessons that we learned about, and while working for the government, I also worked for Heritage Canada. At that time, I was involved in the two concepts, ethnicity and identity. And I was looking at identity of Canadians who would be of mixed marriage, children of mixed marriage. That gives me a different facet. And Tanya has talked about multiple identities today. This is what I was looking at. So it's a very interesting aspect. So about the people in Bangladesh, there are about 5,000 or so. There's no statistics. Even the High Commission doesn't have it. Out of that, there's some people like me, like who are first generation, and then our children and grandchildren, they're doing very well. In the government, you have a large number who would be bureaucrats. They're economists mostly, geologists, economists, IT specialists, MBA graduates. They're doing very well. And their children. The children have gone into government with no problems. There are a huge number of doctors who just couldn't do well, the first generation, because the recognition problem, accreditation problem. So they've switched to other groups, other areas. For example, some of them have become biologists, microbiologists, I should say, moved into other categories like medical technology, radiology, and all that stuff. And some have gone into drug and addiction, doing well, and some have simply given up driving taxis and going into all kind of odd jobs. But they're happy that their children are doing well. So I think somebody mentioned about the children, you came for your children. So they're happy to see that their children and grandchildren are doing very well. So that is what it is. There are lawyers, same problem, but I guess two are doing very successful because they have done some courses here, equivalency. The new generation Bangladeshis who went to law school, they have no problem finding jobs. They're working for the Department of Justice, doing very well. Overall, if you look at the Bangladeshis in Ottawa, they're doing very well. The problem that I see with them is identity. And that includes my own children and myself and her family. Everything seemed to have changed since 9/11, actually, frankly. 9/11 has changed us over. Right now, I looked at, I went to all these groups in Ottawa that you have, very strong sentiment about the Muslims, Bengali Muslims. They're involved in several kinds of activities, and I have outlined them here. But the groups that you will see that they have, they're involved in education, training, assisting, doing a lot of charity work, and their identity. Mobina Jafar, who comes from here, actually, she came to one of our programs, and she was very happy to see how the young Canadians were doing well, and they invited them to the Senate. And she introduced these young Bangladeshi as Muslim Canadians. She said, Mr. Speaker, they are not just Canadians, they're Muslim Canadians. And I talked to them, and they also see themselves as Muslim Canadians. And this is where the crunch is. How do you see yourself? Some of the kids I was talking to, the group growing up here, they see as Canadian Muslims, and see as I'm a Muslim first, and then a Bengali. And it's a debate that goes on and on and on. But the point is, they have a distinct identity. I know from my own experience, my sister who lived in London, Ontario, their children, they're kind of embarrassed when they're growing up because there's so few Bengalis and they wouldn't really talk Bengali in front of them. They don't try to mix with the mainstream, but they couldn't do that either. So they lost on both sides, actually. And that was now in Ottawa, that is not the case. The young generation. Among the Hindu Bangladeshis I talked to, they don't practice religion as such. During puja, they do some kind of celebrations with Indian groups because of their proximity. But they don't take that religion seriously. Buddhists too, there are a few Buddhist families I talk to. They're not practicing, but they say during their religious, spiritual days, they do hook up with other groups like Barbies and others, not Barbies, sorry, Vietnams and other groups. So, they do that regularly. But the Muslims are very organized. They're very organized, they're distinct identity, and they're very assertive. If you look at my papers, even the groups they've, and this is the kind of training that the children are growing up with. They're not embarrassed at all. And they have also identified with the other marginalized groups, for example, the Aboriginals. There was a big controversy a few months ago about whether or not the government should support a native organization funding, but the Muslims came out and gave funding. During the last election, when things were really going this way, there was a slogan that the Muslims created. It was ABC, vote all but conservative. And the reason that it doesn't matter whether you vote for care for liberals or conservative, but vote them out. And the Muslims in Ottawa, it's a really swing votes. It's a big group, such a group. So what we have is politically friendly, friendly. They call it religion friendly, Muslim friendly MPs. Everybody's Muslim friendly. They come to mosque every day. When I go to the mosque, I see them. They're standing and greeting us. And it's politics. That's a big, because it's such a powerful group in the Gatineau area. Or they can swing votes. That's why. Children, exactly, they're growing up with no shame. I remember my son, he was 15 years old during 9/11, and he kind of changed suddenly. But he still considers himself as Canadian. That's very good, so do I. And about the identity, I talked to my children who were born here. To what extent, like my son is always happy watching all the hockey games, and he said, but Abu, I don't enjoy it. I said, no, Abu, you have to enjoy it, you have to like it. I said, no, what do? I don't really like ice hockey. So this is it, but how they look at themselves, and then they speak fluent French, and I do too. And I was asking them, because I have to translate, and then I do, and he says he doesn't have to translate. So my son was saying that when he counts in English. I said, but I don't do it, I do it in Bengali. I don't know, I'm more comfortable in doing it. So this is how he defines us. But at the end of the day, he said he's a Canadian, he's from Bangladesh, his parents are from Bangladesh, but he's a Canadian. So this is the difference. I have written a book here, it's on the visible, on the boys and girls who were adopted in 1972. They're born as a result of rape in 1971. They were adopted by parents who would be white Canadians, and they were raised in Canada. They came when they were 3 months old. So they're all white Canadians by white parents who were absolutely, who were not childless. They had parents, they had children, biological children, but they still adopted. So I asked these children, I asked all of them about their identity, because their parents are white, siblings are from different countries. What is their notion of identity? We said, I'm a Canadian born in Bangladesh. So he said, I'm a Canadian. I said, we don't look like a Canadian. He said, no, I'm a Canadian. My parents are from Canada. This is where everything I learned is Canada. So this is what it is. Then I got into conversation with them about what is your notion of who you are and what is other people's notion. It's like people keep asking my children and other children's also, so where are you from? There's one guy who said, I'm from Vancouver. He said, no, I mean originally. So he got fed up and he said, well, originally I'm from my mother's home. So that was the answer. Like, they would never stop. Like, I have a colleague, his forefathers, ancestors were actually, they came from fugitives from the States. They settled in Nova Scotia. And he was going to universities about my age. And he said that they keep asking him, so are you going back to the island? They think that he's from one of the islands, Caribbeans. So he said, for God's sake, how many years, how many generations do you have to live here to be called Canadian? He said his forefathers are born here. But he said, so this is it. At the end, it's a race that comes into play, whether you like it or not. It determines who you see. My son says, I'm 100% Canadian. I said, but people don't see you as you. I said, I know, but I'm a Canadian. So this is your perception of who you are, and other people's perception of who you are. And while doing this, I was trying to determine at what point do you cease to be an immigrant. Like if my son was born here, he's not an immigrant, he's son of an immigrant, and my daughter, my grandchild is born here, her mother was born here, and still seen as immigrants. So you never cease to be an immigrant. Whereas if you're a European, a mainstream, a white Canadian, like Bosnian, our imam is from Bosnia, and his daughter, if you see her, just the way she speaks and interacts, for the life of you will never think that she's a foreigner. She's like a Canadian. But yet her father is from Bosnia. So it's the race, it's the color of your skin that determines your identity, no matter how you look at yourself. For others. And when I was doing my work, we were arguing with self-identification. There are a lot of people in the government who don't self-identify because this is the thing that I don't want to be boxed in. I don't want other people to tell me who I am. I'm not Chinese, I'm not Japanese. But so my big director was saying that, Mustafa, it's not who you think, it's who other people think you are. And that's how you self-identify, that I'm Chinese, I'm South Asian, I'm East Indian, this is it. So identity, I think it will go on, we can continue forever. I don't know, I can go on forever and ever, because I just tried to put some thoughts here. And very interesting papers this morning, very interesting. I'd be very happy to carry on conversation with you guys if you ever want. I'm doing another book, which would be on Canada and formation of identity of minorities. So I would end at that actually, because I just could go on and on. Thank you.